Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood of Your Legacy Legal Care, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest today is Christy Yates. Good morning.
Hi, how are you, Kim? It's nice to be here.
And we're super glad to have you. Christy is an author and a psychologist, and so she has some interesting things to talk about today, which is always good. And today we're going to talk about thriving in the sandwich generation. And we have a lot of clients that are, doing that thing. And so I was doing teenagers and grandparents, so I'm not sure that I actually fell in the definition of sandwich, but it was close. And so,
Yeah.
at the time it was a lot, and it was a lot. And so let's just kind of start with some basics just for our listeners to talk to them about, what's the, and when you say sandwich generation, kind of maybe define that.
For sure. And I would say you probably were in the sandwich generation. I think that we are in a place where we have much broader terms at this point because typically what it means is someone who is raising children in their home, typically under the age of 18, and also managing the care of an aging elder. And typically we think of that as their own parent or in-laws, but it could be a grandparent. It could be both. It could be a spouse, but you're basically squeezed between two generations. And that's really why it's called the sandwich generation. You're sort of stuck in the middle there.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. And so when you start thinking about, the sandwich generation, it's like you already think you've got kids at home and potentially aging parents or aging grandparents. But what do you find in what you do now and what you've experienced, the unique challenges that people in the sandwich generation experience?
I think the number one difference from people who are not having children in their home is when we're raising our kids, we have lots of things we're trying to accomplish there or do, or how we want to show up for them, right? They have different milestones we're paying attention to, and they're growing and we're trying to raise them. And we want to show up with joy and accessibility to them. And then on the other end, we might be caring for someone who needs us a lot, who is ailing or aging. And if they're aging, we sort of already know the end of the story, right? We're all going to pass away at some point. And that can trigger something called anticipatory grief. So really that grief process that starts before someone has died. And that can bring up sadness, anxiety, frustration, old resentments, all kinds of things. And then it makes that really hard to show up with joy and aliveness with our kids, right? And sometimes we want to protect our kids from that. We want to shelter them from all of what we might be feeling, when I would suggest that there's another way to handle that. But that is one of the primary things that I think gets in the way, is that really trying to be two different people for two different groups of people we're caring for. So that's one of the primary things. I think the secondary thing is that it's sort of like the Twilight Zone, really. We might be, the image I like to give people is we might be handing off our car keys to our teenager, right, our newly minted driver, at the same time trying to wrestle keys from mom or dad because they shouldn't be driving anymore. And that's just like, those are two very different conversations. So that can really cause us some internal strife. And if we don't approach those well, because we're wrung out or we're working full time on top of all of this, it can really make communication difficult. And those are the things that kind of impede our well-being too. And sandwich carers tend to have a lot of stress that's exacerbated by these two different kinds of things that they're doing, in addition to all the other things they're doing.
And I tell people a lot, my grandmother should have stopped driving years before she stopped driving, and so so I was used to always afraid to get in the car with her because the woman stopped at green lights, ran red, just she'd be talking and she just drove, So
I know.
when the kids were little, it was great because I was like, oh, I got the car seats, so I need you to ride with me. We want to unload all this stuff. So I drove everywhere, every chance I got. I just threw her in the car and like, I'm driving these days. But I
Yes.
spend a lot of time talking to clients about how you get the keys away discreetly, how you get them manipulative, how you get them, the lies you may have to tell, to get them, because you worry so much about them, but the reality is you have to worry about who they run into and could they hurt someone, and
Right.
so it's like sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, so. And so I'm not really sure about how old your kids were taken care of, but is it easier for someone whose children are teenagers or college students rather than, really young children?
That's a really great question. And I think so. My children at the time were middle school and early high school, and then through high school years. So they were, we could have pretty frank conversations about what was going on. And both of my parents were diagnosed with some form of dementia, so we could talk about that too. We could talk about what's Alzheimer's, grandpa has something called vascular dementia, and here's how it's showing up. And so when he's doing this, I know grandpa's not paying attention in the conversation the same way he used to, and here's what's going on, and we could talk about that. But I think with young kids, it's hard because they may not fully understand what's going on with you, right? They may see, and children soak up our energy. So when we show up with this anxiety and this frustration with maybe what's happening with the older folks we're caring for, um, they might not understand what's going on. But we can still have conversations with young children. We can still say, here's what's going on. And we talk about feelings and we say, just like sometimes you're sad or you're upset, sometimes mommy gets upset, sometimes daddy gets upset. And here's what's going on for us. And so it's not you. You're doing great, but I need some time to take care of me. So this is a really great conversation to have for kids because we're role modeling taking care of ourselves at an early age, right? And that's kind of what we hope for our kids, is that they learn how to manage their emotions too. So it's about paying attention to how we're regulating our emotions, but not excluding our kids from that conversation, because these may be people that they know. Well, they may not. If we're a long distance caregiver, they may not have a intimate relationship with their grandparent. But we want to let them know what's going on with us, because that's what our kids are paying most attention to. So I think it's important to, at age appropriate ways, talk to our kids about what's actually going on. We don't need to go into the nitty gritty details. If it's, some physical ailment that's very scary, we don't need to go into all of that. But we can just say, grandma's not as well as she used to be, and that hurts my heart sometimes. So here's why I get a little bit cranky. Okay. It's not you, it's me, and I'm going to try and do better. And so let's think about, what do you do when you feel cranky? I mean, invite them into that. And then with our older kids, we can be a lot more direct, and we can talk about what I'd say really older elementary into middle school. We can be really clear about what might be happening. Again, we don't need to go into all of the details of all the pathology, but just to talk about what is happening and then what's happening for you and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I can't say that I was probably really good at that in that aspect of it. And so, because I had 4 teenagers at home at the time, from about, probably when it first started, from about 11 to 15, kind of stuff, through like 13 to 17, kind of those kind of couple of years was probably the most involved, but my kids with my grandparents, I mean, they saw them usually twice a week. When they were growing up, weekends, they spend a lot of time with the grandparents. So you have to sometimes, I know I didn't do such a good job taking care of me, but but it was definitely, definitely maneuvering, trying to really juggling it. It's like really lots of balls in the air and hoping none of them
Absolutely.
drop, so. And
Kim, I think that that's what you just said is so key, that you didn't take as good a care of yourself, and that's usually what happens with the sandwich generation parent in the middle. We expend all of our energy on our kids or our other person that we're caring for, and we're left with nothing for ourselves, and that's something that is really hard to shift. And I would say nobody's perfect at this time, so I wasn't. Oh my gosh. That's why I wrote my book, because I wasn't, and I wanted to talk about how we can change some of these things.
I just think it's important, for people to understand, that it's, and I do a lot of caregiver workshops, because I'm so passionate about it, because, my grandfather wasn't taking care of himself, which is when he ended up with the strokes, and so you always want to make sure that people really get it. So I'm really glad that we're kind of honing in on this. And so,
Yeah.
and so what about family? How do you can you get the family involved in caregiver duties?
I
Should
think
you?
that's always an ideal, and we'd like to do that. So when we're talking about our immediate family, I think with kids, I will point out that actually in the United States, there are probably over 5 million children who are actually doing a lot of caregiving. Because the cost of caregiving in home is so expensive, it may come to a point where, a teenager has to leave school and come home and take care of grandma because mom's working the second shift, because that's there's all these things. And so they may be actually doing a lot of direct caregiving. So we need to make sure that if our children, and that's not bad. I mean, in the history of humanity, that's what we always did. Everyone took care of everyone, and multi-generational families, that's typical, right? It's when it crosses over to a place where a child doesn't have the opportunities to interact with people their own age, to participate in extracurricular activities that might be beneficial for them in their later life, college applications or jobs or things like that. So we just need to check in on that. But overall, I'd say finding ways for kids to interact is great. And they could be simple things. It could be things like, if you could just read with grandma for a little bit, that's great. Practice your reading with grandma or grandpa while I'm making dinner, while I'm doing such and such. It could be helping with laundry. It could be helping with older kids who can drive. It might be, can you pick up a few items at the store for grandma and drop them off? That would be great. That would help me out so much. There are little things that people can do. And then there are other kinds of things that folks can do. They can help out with chores around the house, so that lightens your load a little bit. And then I think when we talk about wider family, then we get into some other conversations about siblings and how do we negotiate those pathways. But I think in our immediate family, there are definitely ways we can ask our kids to help us out. And I would also phrase that too, is not just like helping me out as if it's all my job, but this is how families work. We support one another, right? It's not like, hey, this is my job and I'm going to offload it to you. It's maybe we can phrase it as, this is our family and this is how we care for one another. And then kids really do like to help. They love to help. So it's good for them.
So what are the benefits of children being part of the caregiving journey?
I definitely see that kids who have some, and there's research to back this up, not necessarily about caregiving duties, but children who are given chores early, again, really age appropriate, right? We're not going to have a 3-year-old mowing the lawn, but we might have them helping to set the table at dinner time or something like that, something little. And as they age up, we can help them do some more things. And the research on that shows that children who have chores in life, actually, that's so beneficial for them as in learning, in college, in later in life. And so I think being able to find things that they can do is excellent. The other thing is children who are asked to participate in this whole family caregiving piece tend to be more resilient for different things. They grow in compassion and empathy in a way that we can't really read a book about. We can read a book about compassion for sure, but actually doing it, actually showing empathy and being in action with it is so powerful for kids learning compassion, how it feels, how to give it, how to receive it too. And so compassion, resilience, and problem solving and negotiation. And I would add that is also something that sandwich caregivers really grow in. We find that people who are sandwich caregivers, especially those who are also still working, oh, you sharpen your saw on time management, on negotiation, on advocacy, on navigating systems. There are so many gifts that we tend to see after everything's kind of come to conclusion, but we can also find them in the course of what we're doing. So I think that there are positives, and I'm not going to say that it's always easy, because it's not. It's hard work, and it's really hard on us sometimes.
I was very lucky because I was self-employed, so I was in total control, of my schedule. So that was helpful. But I was also litigating at the time, so I was running back and forth between, 2 and 3 counties, courthouses, kind of stuff. So you had to juggle, court dates with doctor appointments and things like that. So everything was pretty much was on fire all the time, so it just seemed to work out that way. So tell us about your book. It's Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I wrote that book. Thank you. And I just want to say, I feel like it's spinning plates, right? Like you're up there spinning a bunch of plates, and every now and then one's going to drop, but we have more plates. We'll put them back up. Thank you. Asking about the book. So I wrote my book. I published it in 2021, and my parents both died in 2015. And I was a working school psychologist at the time. And I really looked at, how this impacted everyone. I found when I was going through this, I found a lot of things that helped me think about what to do for my parents, but I didn't see anything specific to all of the dynamics of the sandwich generation. So I tried to fold in not only my experience, but what I learned from research about children and parenting and all of the impacts of this kind of work and grief, and how this can impact how we show up as parents. So I just wanted to share that with folks. And so there's some very practical tips in there. There's a lot in there about self-care and how to really sort of assess where you are right now, do a little self-inventory and see where you need to shore up some help. And it's been received really well. The feedback I usually get are people feeling like they're talking to somebody who's been on the same trip. We just both went on the same vacation, didn't we? So that's really helpful. And what I've continued to do is to talk to people about being in the sandwich generation, and also spending some time talking to employers about how to support families who are caregivers, because, some people have to leave work, and that can really be a financial hit to a family. But if employers can be flexible and supportive, we can find that people can stay working. And that's a relief too. Like a lot of caregivers. I don't know how you felt, Kim, but I felt like sometimes going to work it was just like a release. It was a relief. I knew what I was doing, and I could put some other things on a shelf for a few hours.
Absolutely. And so absolutely. So, and then, well, Christy, I just want to thank you for being on the show. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, get some more information, find the book, how do they do that?
Well, you can find the book wherever you buy online books. So not just Amazon, but Barnes & Noble online will sell them, or any of the thrift books, things like that. So you can find that everywhere. It's also available on Amazon as an Audible book and an ebook. But you can find me at ChristyYates.com. And I'm going to spell that because there are lots of Christys out there. And it's ChristyYates.com. And that's where you can find me.
Perfect. Thanks so much for being on the show today. This is such good information, and we look forward to having you on again soon.
Thanks, Kim. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcasts as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.